I'm not...
I'll pass it to you. I think they don't have enough mics.
So. So, is it open? Yeah. Good morning. Welcome, everybody. I'm very happy, very honored to be with all of you here today. It's about shining a light on the Global Convention for the Recognition of Qualifications and Degrees in Higher Education. It's a very important moment within this framework of the World Higher Education Conference that UNESCO once a decade, this time we say 13 years is organizing. And it's very much important as we chart a new course, a new phase for higher education. This is at least the ambition of this big event from now to 2030 and beyond. So thank you very much, dear ministers, excellencies, representatives of all your countries, to be here with us. So just a few words from my side. My name, first of all, is Stefania Giannini. I'm Assistant Director General for Education at UNESCO since 2018. I'm former Minister of Education and Higher Education and Research in my country, which is Italy. And I'm also by profession and training a university professor. So I would say I feel really at home with all of you today. Well, just a few words to frame a bit the landscape we are moving, we are working now. As we all know, higher education is dramatically evolving, changing, especially in the last few years. Let me recall some numbers that I'm sure you have all in mind. 235 million students are actually enrolled in higher educations globally. And this is a number which is significantly increased in the last 20 years. But what is more interesting maybe to see is that student mobility has tripled to 6 million since the beginning of this century. And these numbers are once again set to double in the next decade. So mobility, higher education as a basic fundamental human right, which is the UNESCO perspective, is very much on top of our and you as political leaders and the university academic leaders a priority. And at the same time, on the other side, we see that the number of higher education institutions and the diversity of program offerings has exploded in the last few years in terms of different actors coming into the picture, state, not state, online, in-phase courses. So all these diversified let me use this term that many use, it's not our language, of course, the market of higher education somehow requires a real deep attention on the dimension of quality assurance, which is one of the pillars of this convention, as you know. And these new realities actually have necessitated a revision of the first generation of UNESCO Regional Convention for Recognition of Degrees and Qualification that you maybe all know go back to the 70s. And so why, when 2 years ago, the UNESCO General Conference member states adopted unanimously the Global Convention for Higher Education, which is the first international treaty on this topic, was really a great moment for all of us. And as you know, a few key words about the purpose and the potential, which is still to be unlocked of this convention. First of all, it's about mobility. I already mentioned numbers, but beyond numbers, we have individuals, we have people, we have students, we have researchers that increasingly have the right and the ambition to move, to experience a different context and environment of learning and research. And they have the right also either to stay or to go back home and recognize their experiences and what they learn. And so I think that having an international tool which can facilitate mobility and promote the right of individuals to have their higher qualifications evaluated through a fair, transparent, and non-discriminatory process, it's really a great achievement. So my first point is really very much to commend all countries represented on this stage, which as the first ratified the Global Convention. I will go back to all of you and each of you in order to give the floor and share with all of us your perspective. Of course, it's not a secret for all of us that something happened tremendously in the world 2 years ago, a virus, COVID-19, pandemic, which actually dramatically affected all different sectors, including education, including higher education. From this conference, by the way, we'll have also a report on the impact of COVID-19. And I do believe that in a parallel session now, they're starting to showcase some figures, but of course there will be in the plenary the opportunity to go back to that. But just to say very briefly from my side, I see two dimensions. One is about, of course, how can I say, affecting dramatically and suddenly student mobility, simply because the world shut down somehow and it was impossible to move, to travel, and so and so. By the way, this is the very first big meeting for university academic world to globally to meet in person and stay together, and that's a great thing. And on the other side, causing setbacks to research activities. There will be some numbers which are very much worrying. Having said that, as in education, as in health, as in other public sector, the COVID-19 pandemic actually also has been an accelerator of innovation. I mean, when exceptional circumstances happen, there is also some opportunity to have exceptional response. And this is why I think that more than ever, inter-university cooperation, which is, by the way, the DNA of university since the establishment of these institutions, is very much important now. It's about the circulation of knowledge, it's about the circulation of researchers, it's about also sharing more and more data, results of research, how you say that all the long process, but still long, but very, very short time compare what it could have been in other times to finalize the vaccination has been a very good example of how it's important to have open science and data. And UNESCO is the institution, as you maybe know, that adopted, member states of UNESCO, the very first recommendation on open science exactly last year. So all these dimensions are very much pillars and different components of this global convention where the key word, the real core, the heart is inclusion. What we want is that higher education, also thanks to this progress we are having with these international treaties and all the commitment of countries, starting from these 14 on this stage, can really be a right, fundamental right for all different learners in the world, including refugees and displaced persons. Let me recall all of us that actually we have 5% of refugees which can have access to higher education worldwide so far. So where we stand today, just moving to the topic and giving the floor to my distinguished guest today. We have 14 countries which have ratified the Global Convention, committing to be bound by it. They include, quoting alphabetic order, Armenia, Côte d'Ivoire, Croatia, Cuba, Estonia, Holy See, France, Lithuania, Nicaragua, Norway, Palestine, Romania, Tunisia, and the United Kingdom. So we also know, and this is a very good news, we also know that 20 countries now, in the next weeks, months, are in the process of ratification. So this is about paving the way for make the Global Convention coming into force. And we are confident that by the end of this year, for sure, this is happening. After this, UNESCO will convene an intergovernmental conference of state parties, as usual, similar to the convention committees that already exist at regional levels, and this is about to steer and oversees the Global Convention implementation, which is another very important part of the work. Well, this is about also, giving a strong message about the importance of investment in our education, especially now, especially this year, when a language, a framework, and some commitments, not exactly to peace, are really, jeopardizing, so to say, the landscape globally. Well, without further ado, I would like now to turn to our speakers. And ahora tengo el placer de dar la bienvenida.
So I'm delighted to welcome Mr. Walter Bellugia Garcia. He's a Minister for Education, for Higher Education in Cuba, and this is the first country in the Caribbean that has ratified this convention. You have the floor.
Muy buenos días.
Good day to everyone. Thank you, Stefania, ADG for Education for UNESCO, ministers, distinguished authorities, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Republic of Cuba, I am delighted to be able to participate in this special session focusing on the Global Convention on the recognition of higher education qualifications. This is a historic moment for the countries that have ratified this first treaty focusing on higher education. And indeed, Cuba, from its very origins, has always signed up for regional and international conventions that seek to try and make sure that there is equality when it comes to the recognition of the quality of higher education qualifications, and particularly when it comes to student mobility. Indeed, we believe that there will need to be even more understanding from governments and more participation from higher education institutions and other stakeholders, such as other parts of academia and authorities that, that hand out qualifications. Indeed, Cuba has also signed up for the recognition of higher education qualifications in the region, in the Caribbean. We are doing everything in our power to make sure that this global convention put forward by UNESCO can intensify more mobility, student and academic mobility between countries that have signed up. And we want to increase access to higher education in our countries. All of this making sure that it's in line with the relevant needs of the society and also always keeping in mind sustainable development. We want to create synergies when it comes to higher education, teaching and learning. We also believe this will allow us to open up more opportunities for research and innovation amongst all of the signatories, so that even more knowledge can be disseminated. Cuba has been the victim of, for 60 years, of an embargo. And therefore, through signing up to this convention, we believe this is recognition of our acceptance in this particular domain. And we will do everything to make sure that education, just like United Nations sets out in its objectives, is of a high quality for everyone and accessible to everyone. Indeed, this convention has opened up a space to create strong bonds with other countries in the area of higher education. It opens up very clear advantages for the signatories, for its member states, and for the people of these countries. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Minister, for opening this debate.
Namely Croatia, and giving the floor now to the Secretary of State of the Ministry of Education and Science, Mr. Ivica Šušak. I hope pronunciation is right. Yeah.
Thank you. Dear Mrs. Giannini, esteemed ministers and high-level representatives, dear participants. It gives me a pleasure to address you on behalf of the Ministry of Science and Education of the Republic of Croatia, which was among the first countries that ratified the Global Convention on the recognition of qualifications concerning higher education. There are two major reasons for fast ratification of the Global Convention. Firstly, recognition of higher education qualifications has been among priorities of Croatia in the area of higher education. The National Development Strategy of the Republic of Croatia 2030 includes encouraging internationalization of higher education. Secondly, we have excellent experience with the implementation of the UNESCO and Council Europe's Convention of the Recognition of Qualification concerning higher education in the European region, the Lisbon Recognition Convention. It has been a valuable legal instrument which enabled large-scale mobility in Europe. Today, we are witnessing a need for large-scale mobility of the global level. We believe that the Global Convention is much needed legal instrument for linking regional recognition conventions. Its strong reliance on regional recognition conventions will facilitate its implementation and contribute to transparency of qualifications at the global level. Therefore, Croatian Parliament adopted the act of the ratification of the Global Convention on the Recognition of Qualification concerning higher education in October 2021. Possible benefits for Croatia are attracting more foreign students from countries beyond Europe, increasing understanding of higher education qualifications issued by the Croatian higher education institutions, as well as supporting access to the education and labor market to refugees and displaced persons, including cases where qualifications cannot be proven by documentary evidence. I would like to emphasize the benefit promoting mutual trust in the quality of qualifications, which contributes to fair and timely recognition of higher education qualifications, notably in countries with small-scale bilateral cooperation in the area of education. There is a need for standardization of recognition procedures on the global level. The Global Convention is at our disposal to make it a reality. I hope that more countries will complete their procedure of ratification, acceptance or approval, so that we can jointly fulfill the objectives of Convention. We would welcome some joint activities coordinated by UNESCO Secretariat on the implementation of Global Convention. Finally, to conclude, international networks composed of national implementation structures envisaged by the Convention have the potential to act as a strong tool to tackle global challenges. I would like to express my sincere hope that the Global Convention will enter in force in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. State Secretary, thank you to Croatia for the commitment and the strong message, a call for action to other countries. And I mean, what we are talking about is very much about the university leadership, and it's about universities to implement this tool. Of course, governments play their role, but we cannot do anything, and nothing happens without universities' commitment. We are lucky to have here outstanding representatives of the university community, talking about Mr. Olosula Bandele Oyewole, Secretary General of the African Universities Association. And I would like really to give the floor to you in order to listen to the university perspective from the Global South. Thank you very much. The floor is your Secretary General.
Thank you very much. I'll be speaking about benefits of the Global Convention and what benefits it will take to various countries and universities. To note that the Convention is very important in promoting access beyond borders. It facilitates mobilities, as we all know, and beyond that, the Convention places education as an important aspect that is relevant to society. It emphasizes the importance of education to society, and where the Convention is ratified, it promotes unity and collaboration among institutions and among countries. Beyond this, the Convention has some specific benefits to students and student mobility. For example, it makes transferability of learning and credits to be possible. It also encourages high quality of education. The Convention makes it possible for learners to be acceptable to different environments, especially to environments beyond their own localities. As I mentioned, Convention promotes mobility, but we also need to note that it promotes mobility of labor across nations. It promotes mobility of skills and competencies, and it connects nations to each other and also connects institutions to one another. It makes learning and education a global good that can be accessed by the private sector, by the national organizations, and really by the global community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks to the African Association, Universities Association is a great partner of UNESCO, and we are very keen to move ahead in the implementation of the Global Convention as well as the Regional Convention of Addis Ababa. I didn't mention the critical role of regional conventions that, as you know, are taking care of the dimension of mobility at regional level. Now, I think another important point of view is the students' perspective. I mean, as I said, since the beginning of this meeting today, what we are doing, what we're trying to do is to facilitate your pathway of learning and to enrich the possibilities to have different experiences around the world. And we have here today, and thanks for that, Aisha, Ms. Aisha Kuram. She's a student from Afghanistan, currently being trained in Germany, as I know, but you also had a role as a student representative at the UN, right? So please, Aisha, if you want to share with us your views, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been 6 months since I left my homeland and became a refugee in Germany. I still remember the day I left. I left my home within minutes with no documents that could prove I've studied for 4 years but couldn't graduate at the last moment. And then there I was in a new country, starting my life all over again. During the first few months of uncertainty and displacement, I turned every stone and knocked every door just to get back to class. I've been told that in Germany, after years of wait and patience in refugee camps, students with no official documents might need to start from school. And even with those that have official documents, they might not be recognized as equal to the German diplomas, and then they still would need to start from the scratch. Honestly, I was ready to start from the zero ground. I just didn't want to miss out on my education. But still, it wasn't enough. I was not able to get admission everywhere I tried. Then I learned that Bard College Berlin was providing scholarships for students that have been recently displaced from Afghanistan. I applied without giving it a second thought. I've been admitted to the college, but what changed everything for me was that they have recognized my prior education, and they have transferred 2 years' worth of credits from my unofficial transcript of Kabul University. And they have helped me to pick up my studies from where they have been seized. Today, just like me, every 2 seconds, somebody is forced to flee their homes to escape war, prosecution, or natural disaster. 1, 2. In these 2 seconds, someone's life is changed forever. We, the young people, uprooted, we were the future of our countries. And with that future being stolen from us, we are still seeking a place of dignity, a place of humanity and growth still in the world until the day comes when we can return home. But many young people who were forced to flee their homes, they are still not able to access education. Many have had to give up on their dream of pursuing higher education, because today, only 5% of eligible refugees have access to higher education. For us, everything can be an obstacle. It's the question of language, it's the question of cost, it's the question of not being able to demonstrate our competencies and the degrees that we have acquired in our home countries. And what struck me the hardest is that today, still refugees are asked to delete their past and every little moment that shaped who they are. Refugee students, despite facing all the other challenges, they are today wasting the most precious years of their lives and wait for being counted as equal and wait for being recognized. But I always find hope in knowing that there are institutions such as Bard College that are supporting and investing in the future of young people who have been displaced and whose realities have been so unjustly defined by the political crisis in their countries. And there exists a convention on the recognition of qualification, and one of its kind that mandates member states to assess and recognize qualification of refugees. But there are very handful of institutions such as Bard College, and the mere existence of this convention is not enough when only 14 out of 193 member states have ratified this convention. At the moment, as we are speaking, 82.4 million people have been forced to flee their homes. The last time we have seen such a huge number of refugees was after World War II, when nations came together to forge United Nations, UN Charter, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And today, this is again that once-in-a-generation moment, when nations have to pull together and they have to find a common solution for the common challenge that the humanity is facing. The answer to the refugee crisis is not the humanitarian response only. Shelter, food, clothing, they're all necessary, they're all needed. But beyond the emergency phase, we need opportunities. We need systems and structures that support the right of education for students, that recognize students and their autonomy, their skills, their potentials, and that help them help themselves. Young people don't just need cooking oil and flour to survive. They need hope, they need future. And that's what you can ensure as democracies and as responsible members of the international community. And what I would like to ask all the member states who haven't ratified this convention so far is to rethink refugees, not as passive, vulnerable victims, but as people with potential, as people with capacities, as people with hopes and aspirations, and facilitate their access to higher education by ratifying this convention, and help them rebuild their lives, help them contribute to their host communities, but most importantly, help them thrive, not just survive. Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha, really very much. Nothing to say in addition to the strong words you mentioned, dignity, the right to hope, and to see your potential unlock as refugees. Just to recall that the Global Convention includes a qualification passport for refugees that UNESCO with Norway and other partners, and the Council of Europe has developed and has been pilot so far in Zambia, and is to be extended and enlarged as a tool really to make the process a reality. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for your words. J'ai le plaisir à ce point de me tourner.
It's now a pleasure to turn to Mr. Doumbia, who has joined us from the ministry in Côte d'Ivoire. I would remind you that Côte d'Ivoire was the first African country to ratify the World Convention. Thank you very much for having come to join us. And you have the floor, sir. Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by apologizing for arriving late. I want to talk about higher education in Côte d'Ivoire. Quite simply, as you stated, ours was the first African country to ratify the convention, but I'd like to add that for quite a long time now, Côte d'Ivoire's higher education system has been among the best in Africa, because our view has always been that we should lay great stress on education in general, and that's something that we make great efforts for every year. For example, 7% of our national budget is spent on education each year, and what we spend on higher education is a significant swathe of that 7% of GDP, as you can imagine. Now, we've undergone crises, and there was this wave of democratization in Africa in the 1980s. And very often, teachers and students have had to move around, and there have been upsets. And so our education system has had certain turbulence. But so since 2012, we have decided to, the government has decided to recast the education system. Now, our higher education has been a roaring success because everybody wants to attend. And very often there's not been sufficient attention paid to the employability of graduates. So we get a lot of students joining the higher education system, and very few of them, with the exception of the engineering schools, very few of them can easily find a job afterwards. So the government is now committed to a root and branch reform. This is starting with our system of degree, master's course and doctorates. This started in 2012, and the reform is mainly or largely aimed at ensuring that our graduates will be employable, can find jobs. So since 2012, we've been reviewing the curricula from top to bottom in conjunction with the private sector in such a way that whether we're talking about somebody with an undergraduate degree or a master's degree or a doctorate, that the person emerging from the system will be adapted to the needs of the job market. We're talking here about the public sector under the aegis of our Ministry for Higher Education and Vocational Training. We have 8 universities, but there's about 30 other higher education schools, mainly for engineering. But what we largely have is private education institutions. We have private universities, grandes écoles as well. There's 509 of these altogether, which means that the private sector does play a major role in the higher education system in the Côte d'Ivoire. The state is involved in the qualifications of these students who pass their bac or secondary education qualification. And those students that go into the private sector of education receive finance from the state. So whether they're going to a private or public sector university, we want to ensure that our students will be more employable once they emerge. There's a thing we call the BTS, which is a 2-year. This stands for Superior Technical Study Diploma, 2 years after secondary education. There's management, finance, human resources are the subjects of some of these diplomas. That's not been too successful in being employable, so in conjunction with the World Bank, we're now reforming this BTS, a French acronym, system to adapt it better to the needs of the private sector and also the public sector, which employs a lot of graduates. So we're making these efforts to ensure that our national education system, which was one of the best in Africa and indeed I would say in the world, because many of our graduates have been employed in other countries, in other parts of the world, we want to ensure that our system, particularly the degree, master's and doctorate system, can be continued to be absolutely competitive on a world level. Now, among these reforms, we have brought back certain courses, particularly in the areas of science and technology, which did decline somewhat in Côte d'Ivoire, because scientists don't always have a very high image. I speak as a scientist myself. Very often parents prefer that their children should study, say, economics, because there's much more money there, I believe. But I believe that we scientists have a role to play as well. So we're trying to give a fillip to the science part of higher education. And there's a need to have regard for gender as well, because there are a lot of campaigns now to encourage diversity. We're trying to get a high proportion of girls to get involved in scientific and technology studies. So it's not because it's not been just a general decline, but the proportion of females has decreased as well. So these are some of the efforts we're making to review our higher education system, but this goes hand in hand with changes to the basic education system, because we've got a full cycle of secondary from primary school through to school leaving, as well as higher education. So these are some of the efforts we've made, or we are making, to try to raise the level of education in Côte d'Ivoire and to ensure that our higher education system, which is very often, after all, a stepping stone between the national education system and worldwide employment, can continue to be competitive. That's my main message. I did bring a PowerPoint presentation, but it was too long. That's it. Thank you.
Je vous rappelle que l'UNESCO, comme vous savez, soutient du pays sur les processus.
Thank you. I would remind everybody that UNESCO has a system to support these kinds of reform efforts, as is well known by your ministry and your president. You mentioned the part played by the private sector in higher education as well, and I would like to remind you that UNESCO does have one of its flagship programs is on the subject of private and public sector involvement in global higher education, and there's very interesting information to be found in that framework.
Now to give the floor to the outstanding representative of Lithuania, Mr. Petrauskas, President of the Conference of Rectors of Lithuania and the Rector of the Vilnius University. Please.
Dear Assistant Director General, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, I'm honored to be here in this session today and to share Lithuania's reasons for ratifying this convention, as well as to learn more about the experience of other countries. In Lithuania, the procedures of ratification were finalized this January, which made us the 9th country to ratify the convention. When UNESCO invited the member states to join the convention, our Ministry of Education and Science started the procedures right away. However, the overall process took around a year to complete, as it had to go through a number of institutions. But when the voting took place in the parliament, none of the 120 participating members voted against it. That clearly indicate that there are no doubts with regards to the value of this convention. The mobility of students, professors, and researchers, as well as new venues and forms of teaching and learning, are fast increasing in Lithuania, just as they are globally. Yet, the principles of recognition and of qualifications vary among different regions, creating all kinds of challenges for so many members of the academic community. Therefore, the worldwide framework for recognition process has been highly anticipated. So we have witnessed that the adoption of this convention was not a risky endeavor, but a very systematic and well-considered process building on and reinforcing regional conventions which have proved to be effective. When Lithuania ratified the Lisbon Convention back in 1999, they had developed various instruments and tools to implement it, which have been able to apply again. This is why the ratification of a global convention has not required additional financial resources, not created much additional work for our system now. So we found it significant that the global convention will not only harmonize recognition principles, but it will also lead to greater transparency within and credibility of the higher education systems of the participating countries, as well as time-efficient, fair, and non-discriminatory procedures. The convention will result in better access to information, strengthen cooperation and trust between institutions, in addition to expand worldwide mobility opportunities. Finally, convention will lead to reliable higher education quality assurance mechanisms. The added value we have foreseen for Lithuania also includes more opportunities for interregional cooperation, exchanges, and the development of joint programs, and the increased visibility and competitiveness of our study programs in other regions. So finally, it is the shared responsibility of all higher education systems to be consistent when we promise future possibilities to learners and to ensure that qualifications we provide are recognized everywhere. And so with that, we encourage all member states to join Global Convention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for bringing the European perspective. And now we have another interesting point of view to be shared, which is the private sector company perspective. It's my pleasure to welcome also Mr. Oleg Filgin, Vice President of Blackboard, Middle East and Africa. Blackboard is a partner of UNESCO through the Global Education Coalition. You know, he played a big role, still playing during the response of which UNESCO actually coordinated to the huge impact of COVID-19 through digital learning platform and so. And I would like to ask you what the Global Convention means for a partner like you and for employers especially. Thank you.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's my honor. Looking at Global Convention, I think it brings lots of new opportunity for students, really, and provide better access to institutions, to courses, and also to digital content in general. Also, it's facilitating a better career path and also better opportunities globally. If you look at the employers on another side, it also provides better access and more diverse access to all the skills and really to make sure that students who graduate, they can really deliver all the services and products in a way that it address our modern world and our reality. However, I think another thing that convention brings, and it changes the mindset on where we are today, and it really brings a different perspective. It really makes us think that from learning being country-specific, country-focused, to really focusing on a global perspective, both from a learning perspective, but also from the employers. At the same time, we also believe that technology plays a major part in order to make sure that we make this vision a reality. We at Ontology, we believe in infinitely world of learning without boundaries. This is our mission. However, we can't execute on this mission alone, and that's why we have partners like UNESCO in order to help us facilitate and to help us deliver in coordination with the institutional leaders around the world. This is the only way how we can make it work, and you mentioned that we've been part of Global Coalition for some time, for Global Education Coalition. I think over the last 3 years, we delivered the really tangible results. We started with some countries in Latin America, in the Caribbean as well, and now we are trying to scale this in other countries in Africa and many others. So I think we have a very good connection, and we have a lot to cover this in this space. Looking at technology in general, we conducted a very detailed research over the last few months where we surveyed more than 5,000 students across 10 countries. And I think one very interesting point that we derived from the study is that 58% of the students believe they don't get enough services in order to get them ready for the real world, for the employment opportunities. And at the same time, looking at the institutional leaders, 15% of the leaders, only 15% plan investment in this space over the period of next year. So I think Global Convention, coupled with technology, really helped us plug this gap and really help us scale in this perspective. And looking at technology in general, could you imagine a world where a student would be able to pick and choose courses, we can call them micro-credentials, for different institutions that are part of Global Convention. They can use technology in order to identify what would be the best path for my employment, for where I want to be, and really leverage this micro-credential from different institutions. So I think what Global Convention brings, coupled with technology, is really enables institutions to leverage each other's degree, to use course transferability in order to make sure, especially for students which don't get an access to education on a daily basis, who comes from deprived environment, can really facilitate this non-traditional learning journey, as well as our normal degrees and journey, in order to get a better flexibility and develop the right skills for the real world. From the employment perspective, Again, I think it gives us a really access to diverse pool of resources because it gives us a better flexibility, especially to students around the world. And these days, we talk about providing education without boundaries. So I think Global Convention truly goes in this direction to provide education without boundaries for students, but also for employers who can leverage the student and really get an access to much broader and diverse set of skills.
Thank you. Thank you very much for bringing this perspective. I think among the interesting points you raised up, from my perspective, UNESCO perspective, I think you mentioned the importance to be not exclusively country-focused, to be global. I think what we are trying to build, especially now, is a new concept of global citizenship, which is about skills, but also about values and about a better knowledge awareness, what is important to have to address the main challenges the world is facing. And this brings me to another important perspective I wish to ask, to share with all of us, to Mr. Hofdaugen, Director of the Department for Admission and Recognition at the Norwegian Directorate for Higher Education and Skills. Let me recall that Norway is, I would say, the strongest supporter for higher education partner at UNESCO and the pioneer of the Global Convention as the first country to join it. So, Mr. Hofdaugen, the floor is yours. Please give your perspective and the Norwegian vision.
Thank you very much, Assistant Director General, and also delegates, and I would say friends and colleagues here today, because we are here because we are sharing an experience. And as you mentioned, this has been an important undertaking for Norway. And it is a part of our history in a sense that for hundreds of years, young Norwegians would travel abroad, go to Europe, and study at universities across Europe, at Bologna, at Paris, and so on. And so they would come home and they would use their education. And this is a trend that has continued, and as a small country, we are totally dependent on international cooperation for this to be possible and for this to work. And so 25 years ago, we were very active in drafting and implementing the Lisbon Recognition Convention. And as you probably all know, together with the Bologna process, it led to a harmonization of education in Europe, increased mobility, and increased recognition. And so followed other regional conventions, and for us, the natural next step was the Global Convention. Not displacing the regional convention, but acting as a framework and an umbrella to increase cooperation on a global level. So we took an active part in drafting it, and naturally, when we had done that, it was very easy implementing, in a sense that we started the implementation way before in Norway, and for all practical purposes, we have implemented it already. And so, for us, I think one of the important things is that we have all these tools and we have all these ideas. It's always important to hear the student voice, and what you were talking about, these tools exist. UNESCO, tools for recognizing refugees' qualifications. The Council of Europe has them. What we need is to scale them up. It talks about trends in globalization and mobility. Norway has the political goal that 50% of the students should stay abroad as a part of their education. Of course, we have a long way to achieve that, but this is a goal. So what we need to do is to get this global convention implemented as soon as possible. We are almost there, and I have to say that we are important, because what happens when we have implemented it is that we can start building stronger networks, we can increase knowledge, we can build trust, and we can increase cooperation. And in a world that seems to get more uncertain by the day, our answer is that increased cooperation is the answer. So I would really, on behalf of Norway, I would recommend for everybody who's in the process or thinking about it to ratify the Global Convention as soon as possible. so we can start working, but also when you are a part of it, you get the seat at the table when we start building the framework for how this should work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And let me join Mr. Obdegaugen to recommend all countries represented in the room to really, as much as possible, advocate for the ratification. Now I would like to move from, as I said, a small country very actively engaged in improving international cooperation to another country which has, a traditional, strong reputation as being a hub for international cooperation in universities. I'm talking about UK, and I have the pleasure to have sitting beside me the Secretary General of the National Commission of UNESCO, Ms. Anne Anderson. So please, which is the UK perspective as one of the countries that ratified already the convention? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Giannini. I'm very proud to be here representing the UK on behalf of my government colleagues, and we are very proud to be one of the, not the first, sadly, Norway, as ever, it was way in the lead, but one of the first group of countries to ratify this convention, which we think is incredibly important. We, as you know, are in the very privileged position to be not just keen for our students to go overseas, but also we are a strong player in having the privilege of receiving many, many international students. We have already met our target for 2030, which is over 600,000 students come to the UK to study. So that's a great privilege, and we feel that the Global Convention will only increase mobility across member states. And we think it will really help in making mobility possible for many more people in many more member states. As we've heard, the pandemic has been a huge challenge for higher education systems across the globe, and UNESCO has played an important role in helping universities respond, and we're very proud of how UK universities responded, because as the Assistant Director General has said, crisis brings out innovation, and many things have become possible because they had to become possible. And we think that that innovation has enabled us in the UK to make our international opportunities, to make our education more accessible to more people internationally. And the Global Convention is very much in the spirit of that opportunity and that responsibility. We also think for universities to thrive, we need that cooperation that we've heard about, and we really need to take the student perspective seriously. And I'm so proud that the convention will encourage better recognition for refugees, qualification. Aisha spoke very movingly, and we know the terrible circumstances in Ukraine will only increase the number of people who will need that kind of response. So thank you. We're very happy to be involved in that. And we also think quality assurance processes will be strengthened, and trust will be strengthened by students and institutions. So the Global Convention does important work. We're happy to share our experiences of the process of ratification, selling the opportunities, the advantages, and overcoming the challenges. And I'm so happy to hear that more member states are in the process of taking that important next step, because we in the UK are very keen, as Norway is, to get on with the implementation. We need to make this happen, and we stand ready to work with other member states to make this a reality and give these opportunities to students and researchers across the globe. And I think those soft skills that mobility engenders, that appreciation of culture, that people-to-people connection, which is very much the founding values of UNESCO, will only be enhanced by the implementation of the Global Convention. And transparency, mobility, cooperation, this will all be improved when we get this ratification completed and we begin on the implementation. We have experience working through the regional convention, the Lisbon Convention, and we have excellent organisations in the UK UK ENIC who have played a role, and again we're happy to share our experiences and our expertise to help this happen. And so we'd like to thank UNESCO, Spain for hosting this, and we really look forward to working with others to make this important convention a reality, to bring the benefits that we need. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. For bringing this important perspective, and I wish now to move to the country that a few days ago actually ratified the Global Convention, which is a few weeks ago, sorry, but still the 14th. We had the pleasure to have here Mr. Muammar Husni Shwatui, head of the Accreditation and Quality Authority of Palestine, and I wish to share, to give the floor to share your experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Giannini, DJ Assistant of Education, UNESCO, delegates of participating countries, ladies and gentlemen. Today, the world is reunited around in new ways to explore academic cooperation, drafting and ratifying global convention to strengthen the collaboration among countries and higher education institutions. Meanwhile, the occupying power is refusing Israel. The occupying power is refusing to issue and renew work permits for international academics working at Palestinian universities. It also refuses to extend residency permits for foreign students who come to study at Palestinian universities. Israel has established a harsh visa policy that forced tens of professors to abandon their students and leave the country. Violations on academic institutions, their staff and students are still ongoing. The most recent of which was the assassination of Shireen Abu Akleh, a well-renowned as a journalist and respected lecturer and trainer at Palestinian of higher education institutions. God bless her soul. However, Palestine is proud to be among the first countries in the world to sign and ratify the Global Convention on the Recognition of Qualification in Higher Education. This convention is of utmost importance to Palestine, as well as strengthen the academic cooperation between Palestine and the world, facilitate a mobility of academic and higher education institutions among member states. Ladies and gentlemen, Palestinians know more than anyone else the effect of our disasters and forced migration. And we hope that this convention will help us and others to face similar situations. We consider that the Global Convention on the Recognition of Qualification in Higher Education constitutes a broad gate that way lead to openness of the countries of the world to each other, benefiting from their experiences and expertise, and assisting in the transfer of knowledge and skills among them. We look forward to work with all members states to contribute to the scientific and human development of all nations. Thank you again. Thank you for UNESCO to organization this important conference.
Thank you very much. And thank you for Palestine for the force to do the last mile before the World Conference. So now our next speaker is still from Europe, Ms. Ligia Deca, special advisor on educational research of Romania to the president, and I would like to give you the floor to share the Romanian experience with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Assistant Director General of UNESCO, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank UNESCO, the Spanish government, and the regional government of Catalonia, and all partners involved in the organization of this event. I'm a bit melancholic. I was involved in the 2009 World Conference on Higher Education, where we managed to put in the declaration that higher education is a public good and a public responsibility, and I really believe that this global convention is a concrete way of advancing that agenda. So I'm very happy to be here. Then I would like, on behalf of the Romanian government and the Romanian state, to welcome all the countries that have ratified the convention and all the other countries, almost 20 if I hear correctly, which are in the process of doing so. We were among the first to ratify it, fifth, but who's counting? I will explain why I'm happy that we did so, when we did so, namely last year, mid-last year. When we ratified the convention, indeed it did not require a huge bureaucratic challenge, but we saw the benefits almost immediately. Because as it was mentioned, this convention, besides facilitating international cooperation and internationalization, it also addresses another very important issue, which our colleague from Norway, Aisha, and others refer to, and that is recognition of qualifications of refugees. With the huge influx of refugees from Ukraine, Romania, who is not a country used to dealing with huge humanitarian efforts, of course, we welcomed refugees before, but not in these numbers, we were forced to find rapid solutions for recognition of competences in general. And in this respect, the European passport for refugees was a very useful tool, and the Council of Europe and UNESCO were very helpful in sort of training our responsible bodies to be able to help our universities use all of these tools in order to better receive young people, refugees that needed some normality and a chance, and Aisha was saying, and being welcomed into our educational system. I also want to perhaps underline that besides this part, recognition of qualification for refugees, the convention also includes obligations concerning the recognition of partial studies and prior learning. And I think that's a step into the future. It's not just full degrees that we recognize, it's any learning experience. And I think that's part of our desire to have the universal right to education, the universal right to knowledge. And here I would emphasize this also because it facilitates access for all groups into higher education, which is something that I believe we all strive for. I would also underline that the accession to the convention, it's also a step towards showing trust. It's not a huge bureaucratic hurdle, but it really shows trust in other higher education systems, and I think it's the first step towards making sure that we promote peace. And I do believe that UNESCO, together with the UN and together with all our governments, strive to support this idea of supporting education so that we can preserve peace and that all our children can fulfill their potential. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you very much for these important words. The notion of peace is more than ever a very important one. I would say positive peace, which is not simply the absence of war, but is about creating conditions to prevent war, which is what education should be about. And this brings me to the next speaker representing the Holy See, Monsignor Daniele Liezzi. Pope Francis 2 years ago launched the Global Compact for Education, which is very much based on the values that we are somehow talking about. And I would like to give you the floor to share the perspective of the Holy See on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you and good morning to all of you. On 26 November of last year, the Holy See deposited its instrument of ratification for the Global Convention on the Recognition of Qualification Concerning Higher Education. With this formal act, the Holy See has become a party to this global convention on recognition, the first global treaty under the auspices of UNESCO. The Holy See has participated actively in the elaboration of the convention since the beginning of the process in 2012 until its adoption at the UNESCO General Conference in November 2019. The convention will enter into force once it reaches 20 ratifications, and we are very much looking forward to that almost imminent moment. The new Global Recognition Convention is of great importance for inter-regional coordination and effective action on political motivational level, and thus constitutes a significant step towards facilitating academic mobility, as well as inclusive and quality education. The Holy See has always been committed to a global perspective on higher education and recognition, including of ecclesiastical degrees, for the benefit of students among all countries. It has contributed to the success of the work and have hosted one of the expert meetings, thus putting into practice its role and status, so to speak, inter regiones, that is, to be a truly global player also in the field of higher education. In addition to the Global Convention, the Holy See is party to the recognition conventions for the regions of Europe, Lisbon Convention, of Asia Pacific, Tokyo Convention, and of Africa, Addis Ababa Convention. The Holy See does not consider the adherence to the regional recognition convention at all superfluous. Rather, these should be seen in conjunction with the Global Convention as their umbrella. The Holy See looks forward to working together more closely with the current and future parties in an interconnected world for the benefit of the most important higher education stakeholder of all, namely the students. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. J'aimerais maintenant.
Now, I would like to turn to our last speaker, Mr. Bouard, Manuel Bouard, who represents the Ministry for Higher Education in France. Now, France, as you know, is not only a very committed country when it comes to education at national, European and international level, but it's also the host country for UNESCO. So it's a pleasure for me to give you the floor. Thank you, ADG. Madam, ministers, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, I would like to thank all of the organisers of this high-level session that France was also very keen to organise. We're the fourth country to ratify the convention, so there you can see the ranking is complete. And I believe that it's important to recall that France entered this process because it really believes in the added value that this text can supply us with. More consistency when it comes to recognition of higher education qualifications, and also trying to drop some of the barriers to student mobility. We want this mobility, and I believe that many people have said this before me, we want this mobility to be voluntary and not restricted. That's why we hope that this convention can enter into force as soon as possible. This global convention gives us an international tool for recognition that goes further than the regional processes that have already, of course, entered into force. France, of course, has signed up for the Lisbon Convention that concerns Europe. And this global convention It's been created in conditions allowing for facilitating student mobility and international recognition. And I believe it's important also when it comes to values. Indeed, this is a process of recognition that is based on equity, transparency, and non-discrimination when it comes to higher education learning. And these principles allow us to strengthen our international cooperation. So France is particularly attached to these values that are contained, that are enshrined in this text. And I believe that the principle of higher education, this was mentioned earlier, as a public good, I believe it is absolutely fundamental. And indeed, we also have the principles of autonomy and academic recognition and freedom. They're very important issues. Indeed, France's presidency of the European Union will end in June, but with our European homologues, we have undergone some work to look at the principles and values of international cooperation when it comes to higher education and research. There was this was discussed in Marseille in France in March, and I believe that everyone here knows this. We need 20 countries to ratify the convention, so it enters into force. I believe it's going to happen very soon. I'm very happy about that, and I'm sure that UNESCO will be able to convince the countries that still need convincing. And I'd just like to say that at the European level, I'd like to reiterate that at the European level, we really want there to be collective reflection so that this recognition can really be effective. We want to make sure that there is a European strategy that will strengthen higher education institutions for the future of Europe. That was adopted under the French presidency, as I mentioned. I believe that we're sending a very strong political signal that will allow all states to really take advantage of this global convention, and therefore I impatiently await its ratification or entering into force. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Bourras. And you recalled the Marseille conference. That was a very important aspect of the French presidency at the European level. And thank you for introducing this issue, or these issues related to higher education at the European level.
Now we are about the end of our discussion. Still a few minutes. You are perfectly on time. That's great. To keep some interventions from the floor. I understand some countries which are about finalizing the process of ratification are keen to take the floor. In my list, I have UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Sweden. If they are in the room, yes, I ask Sweden. Well, just to keep very short. Yeah, thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you, ADG. Dear colleagues, thank you for giving Sweden the opportunity to participate in this meeting, even though our ratification instrument is actually in a diplomatic suitcase somewhere in Paris. After a year of online learning and a year without people being on campus, we are alive once again here in Barcelona. Ratifying this convention will help to facilitate mobility, and this gives us a new start. We see higher education as fundamental for creating a better world after the pandemic, and something that's absolutely key when it comes to reaching our objectives, our sustainable development goals. We also recognizing qualifications at international level. means recognition not only at the European level, but of course at the international level. Now we just need to transpose this into our national laws. But we also need to make sure that the process is equitable, transparent and non-discriminatory. As my colleagues from Norway and Romania also said, and Aisha said, I'd just like to recall that those who really need to have their titles recognised need to have an opportunity to do so. Thank you very much. And indeed, yes, you revoked one of the titles of our global conference.
My name is Mohammed Al-Mualla, Deputy Minister for Academic Affairs in the Ministry of Education, United Arab Emirates. We are currently looking, or we have just started looking at the Global Convention for Recognition of Higher Education qualifications. We are in the process of studying it and with the purpose of ratifying it. This is a very important convention for us as a country, both because of the composition of the population and also the composition of the higher education sector in the country. For those of you that don't know the United Arab Emirates, we have around 80% of our population is from non-citizens or from other nationalities. They come from more than 180 countries from around the world. So, this convention is very important to recognize their qualifications so that it will facilitate their mobility to the country, their study, continuing further education, and also employability within the country. The higher education sector also in the UAE is very diverse. We have institutions that follow different systems, whether it's UK system, US system, Australian, French, many other systems, and we try to keep all these institutions to keep their unique systems rather than trying to convert them to one unified system for the country. Also, we are working on strategic initiatives to also one of them is study in UAE, which is also championed by the Ministry of Education, and also the collaboration between universities or dual programs with other institutions around the world. So this is very important for us, and it will facilitate a lot of our strategic initiatives. And we are keen to learn from other countries that have ratified this convention already, and also maybe working later on implementation. Thank you very much.
We're really about closing the meeting. I wish to really thank warmly all the speakers. The 13 actually, Armenia couldn't join the meeting, but is one of the countries which already ratified. And +2 and plus very many, I'm sure. Thanks for recalling all the key words, trust, international solidarity, cooperation, importance more than ever to contribute to reaffirm the principle of higher education as a common public good, as a human right, and the best way to assure democracy and stability. We have a short video to really conclude with the words of ministers who couldn't be joined today at the conference. Thank you very much once again. The video, please.
The Global Recognition Convention is a milestone for easing the recognition of higher education qualifications, academic mobility, and cooperation and research activities between countries, regions, and education systems.
And thus constitutes a significant step towards facilitating academic mobility as well as inclusive and quality education.
With the increasing mobility between the regions, it becomes crucial to extend similar provisions to other regions of the world. This would facilitate the exchange of information and best practices. This would enable provision of platforms for collaboration of national authorities across borders and regions.
Today, we are witnessing a need for standardization of recognition procedures on the global level. The Global Convention is at our disposal to make it a reality.
The quality of higher education, student mobility and internationalization are the core of all strategies and policies regulating Armenian higher education system.
Cette convention respecte les textes constitutionnels, législatifs et réglementaires des États partis, et chaque État parti a également la possibilité de dénoncer à tout moment ou d'apporter des amendements à cette convention, ce qui fait que cette convention devrait être ratifiée par l'ensemble des États membres de l'ONU.
Los gobiernos, las instituciones de educación superior y científicas tenemos la gran responsabilidad de apoyar a nuestros países en el cumplimiento de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible y de continuar avanzando hacia una educación inclusiva y de calidad con posibilidades de aprendizaje para toda la vida.
Student mobility to exchange knowledge and experiences is a pillar of higher education. To fight ignorance about each other's ways and lives, we need the future generation of leaders to study abroad and learn to understand other cultures.
By streamlining and improving the transparency and fairness of recognition processes, the Global Convention will enhance the attractiveness of studying for UK qualifications for students from all regions. I hope that this ambitious global initiative will help us and other countries and regions continue developing, building trust in and improving the quality of our higher education systems.